The Laughing War Council. The Zarkonian Dominion had conquered thousands of worlds. Their empire stretched across entire star clusters, their war machine a force of brutal efficiency. No species had been able to resist them, not for long. Their fleets reduced planets to smoldering husks, their soldiers armed with energy weapons that could incinerate a man in seconds. They were the apex predators of the galaxy. And now, their war council had turned its attention to Earth. Inside the bridge of the dreadnought Scourge, the Zarkonian warlords gathered around a holographic display of the Milky Way, their reptilian features contorted into amused grins. They call themselves humans. General Vorak sneered, his sharp fangs glinting under the dim blue light. A backward species that still relies on kinetic projectile weapons. There was a chorus of laughter from the assembled officers. What kind of primitives still use bullets? One chuckled, shaking his head. The last species that relied on solid ammunition died out 1,000 years ago. Another officer smirked, pointing at the tactical analysis displayed before them. Look at their defenses. Pathetic. No planetary shields, no orbital gun platforms, just ground forces carrying slug throwers. We could wipe them out in a day. Vorak leaned back in his throne-like command seat, his scaled fingers tapping against the steel armrest. Not a day, he mused. An hour. The council erupted into cruel laughter. Across the bridge, a young strategist, newly assigned to the war council, hesitated. He had studied humans more closely than the others, and something about them bothered him. "Sir," the strategist interjected cautiously, "humans are persistent. They survived their own wars, even when facing extinction. And their tactics." Vorak cut him off with a dismissive wave. Persistence means nothing against firepower. Their wars were fought with crude weapons and primitive strategies. They do not understand what it means to face a true empire. He turned to the assembled warlords, eyes glinting with hunger. "We will descend upon Earth like the storms of old, burn their cities, enslave their survivors, and crush whatever pitiful resistance they offer." A chorus of agreement followed. The invasion was decided. No one, not even the young strategist, suspected the war would go any differently. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The invasion begins. The first wave of Zarkonian shock troopers landed on Europa's moon base, a human outpost orbiting Jupiter. It was a massacre. Their energy cannons tore through human defenses, obliterating steel bunkers, melting armor, and turning soldiers to ash. Within an hour, Europa fell. The second wave struck Mars, where Earth's largest military installation stood. Resistance was fiercer, but the result was the same. Within a week, the Zarkonians had pushed their forces toward Earth itself. They had never lost a battle. They had never failed to conquer. And so, when the first battalion landed on Earth's surface, they marched with confidence, mocking their enemy as they advanced. They didn't know they were walking into hell, mocking the sniper's bullets. Sergeant Korek, a veteran of 100 planetary invasions, stood with his unit in the ruins of an Earth city. Smoke curled into the sky, the scent of scorched metal and burning flesh thick in the air. "Look at this place," one of his soldiers laughed, kicking a fallen human rifle. The weapon skidded across the rubble, coming to rest near a shattered building. Wood and steel. Pathetic. Another soldier picked up an abandoned sniper rifle, examining it with a sneer. "They call this a weapon. Where's the plasma core? Where's the energy stabilizer?" He tossed it aside like garbage. They might as well be throwing rocks. Korak grinned, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "Let's finish this sweep," he said, signaling his unit to move forward. And that's when the first shot rang out. It was a sharp, thunderous crack that split the air. One of the Zarkonian soldiers, a lieutenant, dropped instantly, a hole punched clean through his helmet. For a moment, silence. Then, panic. The soldiers scrambled for cover, their amusement vanishing in an instant. "Where did that come from?" Korak barked, scanning the ruins. The sniper had fired from over a mile away. No heat signature. No plasma trail. Nothing for their scanners to track. Another shot. Another soldier crumpled to the ground. "Sniper!" someone shouted, their voice laced with fear. Korak's grip on his rifle tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be unstoppable. And yet, they were being hunted. Lieutenant Ethan Hayes, the ghost in the ruins. From a broken skyscraper overlooking the battlefield, Lieutenant Ethan Hayes reloaded his sniper rifle. His hands were steady, his breathing slow. He had been waiting for this exact moment. The aliens thought human weapons were primitive. They didn't understand. This wasn't just a rifle. It was a tool of surgical precision, built to kill in silence, from the shadows. Hayes adjusted his scope. Wind speed, distance, bullet drop. He had time for one more shot. Through the lens, he saw Sergeant Korak giving orders. Hayes exhaled, pulled the trigger. The shot pierced the air, and a second later, Korak collapsed. His soldiers screamed. They began firing wildly into the ruins, shooting at ghosts. Hayes allowed himself a small smile. Let them be afraid. Let them feel hunted. Because this war wasn't going to be fought with technology. It was going to be fought with strategy, with patience. And if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was fight back. The hunters become the hunted. The chaos in the ruined city was absolute. Alien war cries turned into screams. Confident strides became frantic dashes for cover. The towering armored Zarkonian soldiers, once the image of unstoppable galactic dominance, were now cowering in the debris, eyes scanning the ruins in desperate panic. Somewhere in the shattered skeleton of an old skyscraper, Lieutenant Ethan Hayes pulled the bolt on his sniper rifle, chambering another round. One shot, one kill. That was the rule. It had kept him alive through Earth's worst conflicts, and it was about to become the Zarkonians' worst nightmare. Through his scope, he watched the once mighty battalion crumble. They were powerful, but they weren't ready for this. Their weapons, advanced plasma rifles capable of melting through steel, were useless. Plasma left heat signatures. Plasma gave away positions. Plasma forced them to be seen. Bullets didn't. A Zarkonian officer peeked out from behind a collapsed structure, barking orders at his troops. Hayes took the shot. The alien's head snapped back. His massive body crumpled to the ground like a discarded puppet. Another shot. Another alien down. Panic surged through their ranks. The survivors scattered like insects under a torch, firing blindly into the darkness, hoping to hit something. Anything. They wouldn't. Hayes had already moved. The fear spreads. Captain Vorak watched in stunned silence from his command post, miles away from the battlefield. The large display screen in front of him flickered with red markers disappearing one by one. His forces were being slaughtered. By one man. A growl rumbled from his throat, deep and guttural. This wasn't possible. Zarkonian forces had conquered thousands of worlds. They had reduced planets to ash, wiped out entire civilizations in mere hours. Yet here, on Earth, one sniper was killing them like cattle. Impossible, Vorak muttered, his scaled fingers curling into a fist. This is nothing but human luck. Find him. Kill him. One of his lieutenants hesitated. Sir, our sensors can't detect him. There's no heat signature. No energy discharge. It's as if he's a ghost. Vorak finished, his jaw tightening. The room fell into a tense silence. For the first time in Zarkonian history, they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. Hayes wasn't alone. Ethan Hayes crouched low in the rubble, his breathing steady. He had already moved 4 times since his last shot. The key to survival wasn't just being deadly, it was being unseen. And he wasn't the only one. Across the city, other human sharpshooters were waiting, watching, picking their moments. Somewhere south, in what used to be a business district, Sergeant Ava Sinclair had her own rifle trained on an alien patrol. Her radio crackled softly in her ear. Hayes' voice. "How's your sector?" Ava smirked, steadying her aim. About to get messy. She squeezed the trigger. The alien commander leading the patrol jerked backward, dead before he hit the ground. His squad panicked, scattering in all directions. Another shot. Another kill. The humans were turning the battlefield into a death trap. And the Zarkonians were walking right into it. A desperate counterattack. The aliens were on the verge of breaking. But they weren't beaten yet. Their officers barked orders, forcing the surviving troops into tight formations. If they couldn't find the snipers, they'd flush them out. They unleashed the Seekers. Small, hovering drones emerged from the backs of Zarkonian shock troopers. They were spherical, equipped with thermal imaging, motion sensors, and advanced tracking software. Designed to hunt. Designed to kill. Hayes heard them before he saw them. The low, eerie hum of their propulsion systems. He swore under his breath. They weren't playing anymore. A predator among predators. The first drone hovered over the wreckage, scanning for movement. Hayes was already on the ground, still as death. He let his heartbeat slow. Shallow breaths. No sudden movements. The drone hovered closer. Then closer. Then, a muffled gunshot. The drone shattered midair, falling to the ground in a smoking heap. Hayes exhaled. "Nice shot, Sinclair. Try not to make me save your ass again," her voice crackled over the radio. The element of surprise was gone. It was time to disappear again. The Zarkonians still had numbers, but the humans had something better. Patience, strategy, and an unbreakable will to survive. Captain Vorak's growing fear. Captain Vorak's mandibles twitched with frustration as he watched the battle unfold. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. His forces should have overrun the humans in hours. Instead, they were dying in the streets, cut down by an enemy they couldn't even see. His fists clenched. "We need an orbital strike," he growled. "Burn the city to the ground." One of his officers hesitated. "Sir, our forces are still on the ground." Vorak's eyes narrowed. "Then they die with the humans." The order was given. Above Earth, in the darkness of space, the Zarkonian fleet repositioned. Their warships turned toward the surface, targeting the ruined city. A countdown began. 10 seconds until impact. 9, 8. Hayes and his team had no idea what was coming. 7, 6. The sky above them began to glow. 5, 4. Then, out of nowhere, a voice crackled over the human comms. "Get out. Now." A new player joins the fight. High above Earth's orbit, a fleet appeared. Not human. Not Zarkonian. Something else. Something older. And they weren't happy about what was happening to Earth. A sky set ablaze. The first thing Hayes noticed was the sky. It had been dark for hours, the smoke from the burning city mingling with the night, blotting out the stars. But now it was glowing. An eerie, unnatural light spread across the heavens, washing over the battlefield in shades of crimson and gold. The Zarkonian fleet had begun its bombardment. The city would be gone in less than a minute. Hayes didn't need a countdown. He could feel it. The heat of death coming, the pressure in the air shifting, the moment before annihilation. But then, the glow changed. It flickered, then pulsed. Then, in an instant, the entire sky exploded in white fire. The Zarkonian warships, hundreds of them, were engulfed in sudden, chaotic destruction. Blossoms of fire and debris erupted like silent fireworks across the void. One by one, the mighty ships of the Dominion were ripped apart. Not by human weapons, not by their own fire, by something else. A new force enters the war. Captain Vorak stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief, as the battle feed from orbit turned into static. His fleet, his mighty, unstoppable fleet, was burning. "What's happening?" he roared. No one could answer. His officers scrambled to recover data, but the transmissions were a mess of screams and static. Then, a single clear signal cut through the chaos. A voice. Not Sarkonian. Not human. Something ancient. Something cold. This world is not yours to take. The transmission ended. And suddenly, Vorik understood. They were not alone in this war. Evacuation under fire. Hayes barely had time to process what was happening in orbit, because the city was still burning. Whatever had attacked the Sarkonian fleet hadn't touched the ground forces. Yet, and that meant they still had one last fight to win. "Sinclair, do you read me?" Hayes barked into his comm. "Yeah." Her voice came back, strained. "But we got a serious problem." Hayes turned, scanning the ruins below. The Sarkonian troops, panicked and leaderless, had started to fall back. But not all of them. Some had stopped running. Some had realized they had nothing left to lose. And now, they were charging. Hundreds of them. A final, desperate push to take the city before the unknown fleet decided to wipe them out too. It was a suicide charge, and Hayes had no choice but to meet it head-on. The last stand. All remaining forces fall back to Sector 17. That was the last order Hayes gave before he ran. Sector 17 wasn't much, just an old, half-collapsed industrial zone. But it had cover, and that was all they needed. The remnants of Earth's defenders, snipers, scattered infantry, a few remaining tanks, dug in behind ruined buildings and barricades. They could see the Sarkonians coming, and this time there was no plan. No strategy. Just survival. Sinclair crouched beside Hayes, checking her last magazine. "Any brilliant ideas?" Hayes exhaled slowly. "Yeah, we kill every last one of them." She smirked. "Thought you'd say that." Then, they heard it. The war cry of the Sarkonians. And the battle began. Death in the streets. The first wave of fire came from the humans. Bullets ripped through the air, cutting down the first line of charging Sarkonians. Some fell instantly, their bodies tumbling into the rubble. But the others kept coming. Hayes fired until his rifle clicked empty. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed a fallen Sarkonian's weapon, a massive plasma rifle, almost too heavy for human hands. It didn't matter. He lifted it, aimed at the nearest target, and fired. The recoil nearly broke his shoulder, but the blast tore through an entire squad. He kept moving. No stopping. No thinking. Just fighting. All around him, his soldiers fought like cornered wolves. There was no retreat. Only this moment. This fight. The battle ends in fire. And then, the sky flashed again. For a second, everything froze. And then the city itself shook. A deep, resonant sound rumbled through the ground. Something so vast and ancient it felt impossible. The air turned electric. The surviving Sarkonians stopped fighting. Then suddenly, they started screaming. One by one, the aliens clutched their heads as if something was inside their minds, breaking them from within. Hayes watched in stunned silence as the mighty warriors of the Sarkonian Dominion fell to their knees, then collapsed, dead. Not from bullets, not from plasma, from something else entirely. Something unseen, something that had just decided the battle. The unknown fleet reveals itself. The city fell into eerie silence. Hayes lowered his rifle, panting, trying to understand. The Sarkonians, all of them, were gone. A voice crackled over his comms. "Hayes." Sinclair's voice was shaky. "Look up." He did. And for the first time, he saw them. Not Sarkonians. Not humans. Something else. A fleet of impossibly sleek, black ships hovered above the ruins, their surfaces rippling like liquid metal. They had no visible weapons. No markings. Nothing but a presence that made Hayes' skin crawl. Then, a voice echoed through the entire city. It was not spoken. It was felt. "Your war is over." Hayes didn't know whether that was a good thing or the beginning of something much worse. The silence before the storm. The battlefield had gone eerily quiet. No more Zarkonian war cries. No more desperate gunfire. No more screams of the dying. Just silence. Lieutenant Ethan Hayes stood frozen, his rifle still warm in his hands. He could hear his own breathing, shaky, uncertain. Around him, his fellow soldiers were just as motionless, staring up at the impossible sight above them. The unknown fleet hung over the ruined city like silent gods, their presence suffocating in its sheer alien vastness. The ships had no markings, no visible weapons, no sign of propulsion or even movement. And yet, somehow, they had killed every last Zarkonian soldier in an instant. Not with bullets, not with bombs, with something else, something unseen. And then, before anyone could process what had happened, the voice came again. Not over their radios, not through any transmission. It came from inside their minds. A message from the unknown. The war is over. The words didn't come as sound. They came as a thought, a feeling. Like something ancient, something vast, had reached into the minds of every surviving human at once and decided they needed to understand. Hayes clenched his jaw. His instincts told him to run, to hide, to fight. But against what? He wasn't even sure what he was looking at. Sinclair was the first to speak. "Whoa, who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, trembling. She wasn't alone. The few remaining humans exchanged uneasy glances. Some gripped their weapons tighter. Others simply stared, their eyes flicking from the sky to the countless dead Zarkonians littering the battlefield. The voice returned. "We are not your enemy." That didn't make Hayes feel any better. The message was so absolute, so final, that it almost felt robotic. Like this wasn't a conversation. It was a statement of fact. And then, the ships moved. Or rather, they didn't move. They simply shifted, as though reality itself had decided they were in a new position. In less than a heartbeat, the largest of the vessels hovered directly above them. Its surface shimmered, almost like liquid metal, pulsing with unseen energy. Then, the ground shook. A wave of invisible pressure rolled outward from the ship, forcing every human soldier to take a step back. Some stumbled. Hayes barely kept himself standing. The Zarkonian corpses twitched. Then, they began to disintegrate. Not burn, not decay. Disappear, erasing the enemy. Sinclair let out a sharp gasp as the bodies of their former enemies melted into nothingness. One by one, the fallen Zarkonian soldiers vanished into dust, their forms pulled apart at the molecular level until only empty armor remained. "What the hell?" one of the younger soldiers whispered, his voice quivering with fear. Hayes felt a cold sweat run down his spine. What kind of power was this? More importantly, why? "They're cleaning the battlefield," Sinclair muttered under her breath. "Like they don't want any trace of them left." Hayes swallowed hard. That wasn't the part that disturbed him the most. No, the part that terrified him was the effortless precision. The Zarkonians had been wiped away as if they had never existed. And yet the humans, not a single one had been touched. It was surgical, deliberate. And that meant only one thing. This was a warning, the unspoken question. The silence stretched. The alien ships loomed. No one dared to speak. Then, the voice came one last time. "Leave this place. Do not follow." And just like that, they vanished. No explosion, no light, no sound. Just gone. 1 second, the massive fleet hung over them like silent gods. The next, the sky was empty. For the first time in what felt like forever, Hayes could see the stars again. But now, they didn't feel comforting. Now, they felt like a warning. Aftermath. The remaining humans stood in stunned silence. The war was over. The Zarkonians were dead. The invaders had been wiped from the face of the earth, but not by them. Hayes exhaled sharply, finally lowering his weapon. His hands were shaking. He flexed his fingers, trying to steady himself. Sinclair ran a hand through her short, sweat-drenched hair, staring up at the sky like she still expected the alien fleet to return. "Well," she muttered, breaking the silence. "That was something." Hayes let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Yeah, something." Then came the real question. What do we do now? For the first time since the invasion began, no one had an answer. Because this wasn't a victory. It was a mystery. A reminder that, in the vastness of the universe, humans weren't alone. And maybe, just maybe, they never had been.